So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sjors. I am assistant professor in criminology at Utrecht University. And today we're going to talk about the relationship between urban space and digital gaming. This is a first presentation of some of the research that is part of also the project, and is also related very much to the themes that we seek to explore in our research project. So this is part of the Global Digital Cultures project. This is financed also by Digital Culture project from the University of Amsterdam. And our small pilot program is kind of interested in exploring the relationship between the gaming industry and the global connected cities, and very much comes out of our interest in the large how you say, the large revenue and the everyday pastime. Like gaming is kind of a leading global cultural industry. So our interest very much lies in exploring and in studying the globally produced and globally consumed digital urban worlds, and how these worlds also shape social communities and cultural practices. That is kind of the general aim of our research project. And in doing so, I'm sorry, in doing so, we kind of look to develop a kind of interdisciplinary methodological approach and innovative conceptual apparatuses, kind of what we call playing the city. Today we have two presentations. First presentation will be by Dr. Toni Pape. Toni Pape is a teacher and researcher at the Department of Media Studies at the University of Amsterdam. Tony's current project is very much focusing on stealth, and he looks and in doing so he looks at video games, television, and video art. And the second presentation will be by Sjors Martens, who recently obtained his PhD in media studies and culture studies and computer science at Utrecht University, and his research very much engages with problems that are related to urban games, and addressing more broadly urban spaces. And in addition to that, he also works as a game advisor and reporter for urban game company called Play the City, which also uses games as kind of a means to provide residents of attention neighborhoods, so to speak, of contexts and resources. So I'm very much looking forward to these two presentations. I think in general they will take up half an hour in total, and after that there will be plenty of time for discussion and questions. So without further ado, I understand that Toni will first be the first presenter, and then I'll ask him to share his presentation with us, and we can begin.
Okay, thanks for that. My talk is called Hacking the Smart City, Technostealth in Watch Dogs Legion. And so I want to think about the notion of urban play by exploring the way in which players interact with simulated urban spaces in video games. So this is about cities in games. And the research that I'm presenting is part of my larger ongoing research project called The Aesthetics of Stealth, in which I investigate performances of imperceptibility in contemporary media art, including video games. And I want to find out in that project what the cultural and political significance is of so much contemporary art that stages and individuals becoming invisible or imperceptible. And this includes, for instance, the photography of Liu Bolin and Desiree Palmen, which is specifically about hiding in urban spaces. And I'm not going to say more about this because that's just to give you a general sense of what my project is sort of about. And in this project, I also look at so-called stealth video games, which are video games in which the player has to accomplish a mission without ever being detected by human enemies or digital technology such as cameras. So the player has to remain imperceptible to achieve their goal, sometimes for the entirety of the game. And quite a few of these games are actually set in cities. Consider, for instance, the Assassin's Creed series, which has titles set in revolutionary Paris and in Victorian London, but also many other cities. Today, however, I want to look at the game Watch Dogs Legion, which is set in a near futuristic London, policed by the private security company Albion. After a series of terrorist attacks, the corporation Albion has been given access to London's smart city infrastructure and is in the process of establishing an Orwellian surveillance state. Albion has been also successful in falsely accusing the hacker collective DedSec of carrying out the terrorist attacks I just mentioned. And so now we, DedSec, have to take on Albion by hacking the smart city. The player's general task is to fight against Albion as several members of the underground hacker collective DedSec. That's sort of the background story. Now, in this presentation, I want to study how Watch Dogs Legion connects urban stealth gameplay to a hacking aesthetic and thus digital culture. I want to show that Watch Dogs Legion develops a gameplay aesthetic of technostealth through which one resists the vast urban surveillance network that the game simulates. And because time is short, I'll do that in 3 short steps. First, I will establish the connection between stealth gameplay and urban space very generally, so to give you a better sense of what stealth gameplay is about. Then I will discuss how Watch Dogs Legion conceives the smart city as a dystopia. And finally, and most importantly, I want to analyze how the gameplay of Watch Dogs Legion imagines resistance to the smart city as a form of technostealth through distributed networked agency. And so for my research on the aesthetics of stealth, that's interesting because here stealth becomes an aesthetic strategy for resisting what Ulrich Halpern and others have called the smart mandate. If, as Halpern and her co-authors say, quote, the development of smart cities follows a logic of software development, then how does gaming software itself take up these ideas in a critical manner? And yeah, since this is a meeting sort of I guess, game studies and urban studies, I'll just say this as a last preliminary remark. I'm sort of coming at this from game studies, and I've actually in this presentation left out my passages on smart city discourses just for reasons of time, but I hope that sort of we can bring all that in the discussion. All right, first, stealth and the city. Why are city spaces such an important setting for stealth video games in the first place? This, I believe, can be explained with reference to conventional understandings of especially modern cities as dense, heterogeneous social spaces whose components and subsystems operate in highly complex ways. The functional operations of a city as an organized whole are beyond the grasp of any one individual. And additionally, and here I follow seminal studies of the metropolis by Zimmel and Louis Wirth, social relations in cities are characterized by anonymity, superficiality, and transitoriness. All of this makes urban environments opaque, at least to a certain degree. And this relative opacity of urban spaces makes them amenable to stealth because it allows for tactical imperceptibility when you move into these opaque domains of city life. Stealth games draw on these aspects of the urban imaginary to motivate core gameplay mechanics of hiding, deception, and distraction in various ways. Let me give you 2 brief examples to show you how this can lead to different ways of engaging urban environments: sneaking stealth and social stealth. And here you'll see a little scene from inside a building, not in a public urban space, but it's really just about the kind of movement and how you have to move through the space that I want. That's what I want to show you. In games that rely on sneaking stealth, as the Dishonored series, the urban environment is so hostile that one cannot ever be seen without entering combat. Thus, one has to avoid confrontation by sneaking through shadows, finding alternative routes or secret passages. You can also distract and lure guards. There are many different ways of doing that. By contrast, games that foreground social stealth, like the Hitman series, allow the player to take on different social roles within an urban space through the gameplay convention of putting on uniforms and other disguises. For instance, a waiter's uniform allows the player to enter the personal-only area of a restaurant. Here you see the agent take out a kitchen assistant, then he drags him inside, puts on the costume, and can then move into the restaurant area. So here, stealth is about hiding in plain sight by disappearing into the many different social functions that city dwellers anonymously fulfill for each other. In both sneaking and social stealth, the gameplay is about creating and maintaining a relationally constructed imperceptibility. One hides by using a complex environment's structural makeup. Okay, now, second part, Watch Dogs Legion and the dystopian smart city. In Watch Dogs Legion, this challenge of being stealthy is complicated by the integrated surveillance apparatus of the smart city, which acts against the opacities that I mentioned earlier. So in Watch Dogs Legion, the digital infrastructure of the smart city finally makes the opaque processes of urban organization accessible and commensurable with human desires for comprehensive data extraction, processing, and control. By means of the digital, this increasingly autonomous smart city can perceive itself and respond to its perception in real time. For example, if the player confronts an Albion security operative or steals a car or causes a traffic accident that gets noticed, a slew of drones will immediately intervene to suppress the source of social disorder. So here, clearly, Watch Dogs Legion aligns itself with critical views of the smart city by relating it to predictive policing. This turns the smart paradigm into a mechanism of power that makes the complexity of urban space manageable. And as smart cities make urban processes transparent, it also poses a threat to the positive value of urban anonymity and opacity. Consequently, the player in the role of the resistant citizen is better off moving through the smart city's finely meshed surveillance matrix without being detected. Now, how does Watch Dogs Legion articulate this in its gameplay? The gameplay engages with the sensing devices that connect our bodies to the smart city network. The usual mission in the game tasks the player to physically access a server somewhere in a building, or as in this video, rescue an ally held hostage on a construction site. Usually, the way to the target, which is indicated by a yellow hexagonal marker on the minimap in the bottom left as well, the way to that target will be filled with human guards and surveillance cameras, motion capture devices, armored drones, and other surveillance technology. Thus, a successful resistance mission consists in evading the sensory or perceptive side of the dystopian smart city to get all the way to a target, to the target. And here, basically, in this video, I'm just hacking from one camera to another to parse the space, to see how the enemies move, what's going on, what possibilities for hacking are. Here you see me manipulate the car a little bit to distract the guard. So these game spaces are effectively rule-based environmental puzzles. By rule-based, I mean, for instance, that guards and drones patrol the navigable environment in regular patterns of direction, speed, and so forth. These patterned movements can be creatively manipulated or circumvented by the player by means of a vast array of hacking mechanics and other tech-based gameplay modifiers. For example, guards can be distracted, devices can be turned on or off or repurposed. And so the minute-to-minute gameplay is about playfully creating small diversions and minor deviations in the functioning of a rule-based algorithmic environment. And this is more of a major deviation that leads to an explosion. Anyways, the point is that you have to create openings for undetected movement. And this serves the overall narrative gameplay loop of stealthily occluding one's presence and intruding into the smart city architecture to disrupt it from within. And so this is the hacking aesthetic of Watch Dogs Legion. The gameplay loops require the player to perform these two important aspects of what Colin Milburn calls the technopolitics of hacking, occlusion and intrusion, always at the same time. And we haven't really seen him intrude yet, but I'll show you that in another video in a moment. Okay, so this hopefully explains what the general challenge is that the game formulates for the player. Now I want to look at the way in which the gameplay enables the player to face that challenge. As I suggested earlier, I want to suggest that Watch Dogs Legion proposes a gameplay aesthetic of technostealth, which relies on a network of distributed agency in two important ways. And I want to now explain these two aspects of the gameplay. The first important gameplay mechanic of Watch Dogs Legion is that the player is tasked with establishing a network of DedSec operatives. So one doesn't play as one main character, but one builds a team by recruiting fellow Londoners into the DedSec resistance. Every character that the player encounters in Watch Dogs Legion can be recruited into one's team. And here you see the menu screen of the team with the active operatives in the top left and potential recruits below. Once they have joined the team, these characters become playable and one can switch between operatives at almost any time. Importantly, each of these operatives have certain characteristics or perks that set them apart. You see those indicated on the right. For example, if you recruit a police officer or medical professional, they can get an operative out of jail or hospital more quickly. That's jail or hospital, that's where you go when you die in this game. And the perks that potential recruits in the street would bring to your team can easily be viewed in by scanning Londoners in this way in the street. This is a variation on the social stealth I mentioned earlier. Instead of donning various disguises, the player assigns different playable Londoners to tasks that they are particularly suited for, given their abilities and privileges, which are basically gameplay affordances. So the technostealth of Watch Dogs Legion uses the city's techno sensors to infiltrate the smart city's main vulnerability, people. In Watch Dogs Legion, the population itself becomes an impenetrable network of potential allies, each with something to contribute to the roster of players. Against the all-encompassing web of surveillance technology, Watch Dogs Legion pits a heterogeneous collective of engaged civilians. This is the Legion, referred to in the title of the game. From a gameplay perspective, this foregrounds the strategic side of technostealth. A productive deployment of one's team requires that the player always thinks strategically in terms of which team members' affordances are helpful in any given situation. In a video game, these affordances are always digital algorithmic procedures that modify the gameplay. A hacking perk might allow the player to hack keycards more quickly or from a greater distance, for instance. So the particular challenge that Watch Dogs Legion formulates with respect to the smart city is that the player build their own network of distributed digital affordances and deploys them selectively to exploit the vulnerabilities of the smart city. So while one might say that Watch Dogs Legion dystopian smart city narrative is quite conventional, the game does articulate an interesting algorithmic imaginary in that it foregrounds the vulnerabilities of infrastructures that allow for the penetration of an adversarial network. And an intervention at any given point may only be minimal. Each operative's perks may only make a small difference, but the strength of the network lies in how its affordances are selectively deployed to allow for a series of minor gameplay gestures that slowly but steadily undermine the dominant surveillance network. The second important aspect of technostealth consists in the way agency is distributed across human technology assemblages in the minute-to-minute gameplay, and it leads us back to the construction site. Even though one can always only play as one team member at the same time, the character's agency can be extended to several digital devices at the same time. And so here you see me using a spider bot that also be cloaked, which is why it but you can also do similar things with drones, for instance. So there are these devices that allow you to actually act away from your player character and take people out non-lethally, as you can see here, for instance. So the fast switches between these different devices creates the gameplay experience that one can effectively act in several places at the same time. This multiplication of centers of action allows the player to modulate the algorithmic environment in complex ways and intermittently, at least from different perspectives. And this foregrounds not only the strategic, but also the aesthetic and perceptual side of technostealth. Because this distributed agency is important for testing out the perceptiveness and the responsiveness of the algorithmic environment. These gameplay mechanics oftentimes lead to an experiment with the game's algorithmic architecture and how that architecture senses and responds to the player's actions. The goal of this is always to create temporary zones of imperceptibility in which the player cannot be perceived by the smart city. So to conclude, I'll stop this. To conclude really quickly, in Watch Dogs Legion, the urban play of technostealth consists in the temporary creation of free movement through the playful attunement to the algorithmic environments of the simulated smart city. Resistance consists in modulating the simulated environment through a series of minor gestures, distributed across the game space and enhanced by small strategic gameplay modifiers. So political intervention consists in creating openings within the surveillance matrix of the smart city, rather than full-fledged opposition to and rejection of its digital infrastructures. And hopefully we can discuss in a moment what to make of all that in relation to smart city discourses. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Toni. That was it. Actually, you recorded all these gameplay videos. Was you playing, right?
Yeah, the last two, yeah, at the construction site,
Okay.
I recorded that. Some stuff I took from online, from YouTube.
All right. Thanks so much. Yeah, very much looking forward to the discussion. But for now, let me give the space to Sjors.
Thank you very much. So here's my presentation in wonderful 4:3 ratio. It's an old one, the ratio at least, but okay. So thank you for inviting me. I am here to talk to you about urban games, and more particularly the problems with urban games, and even more specifically, two problems. The fact that players are idiots, and that the goals of urban games, the urban of the urban game, is often not really considered as being urban. And of course, I propose an idea on how to improve this in urban game design. But to do that, we first need to do a small game to start with, to illustrate the possibilities and capabilities of urban games. So I'll need you to imagine for a moment that we're outside in these times. I'm going to send you through the city. We're going to do a little game, a scavenger hunt, and the game's going to have a function. And the first function of this game is, after playing this game, you'll figure out what the green part, or the sustainable part of a city can be. So imagine you're sitting in the street and you walk to the end of the street, and that's where you start your scavenger hunt. And you start walking, and then at the first tree, you go left. Well, we go left. You see a tree already. Depending on how long you walk, that's a thing. Then you see a flower, then you have to go right. Okay, we've now seen a tree and a flower. And depending on how big our walk is, we can sort of judge how much of green we're seeing. Then we have to find a park, and in the park, we can sit around a bit. We can look at the nature and again see what does a park mean in a city. Then, to keep this sustainable completely, pick up a piece of trash and throw it away. This is all part of the game. Just follow the steps. It's going to be fine. And then further continue until you reach the fauna of a city. If you find bird cages, count the amount of bird cages and then take the street by counting and go to that one. Now, small scavenger hunt, you've been interacting with nature by just following some simple steps. We're going to do the same, but now with tourism. At the end of the street, at the end of the trip, you'll know more about your city and what's in it. So we start at the end of the street, go to the left. We'll find the tree. This tree has been here since 19-something. It's a super old tree, super amazing. Then we continue, we find a flower, a local variant. Look at how special our region is. Just follow the steps and you'll figure all this out. You go to the park where this big event happened in the past. Look at how amazing this city is after just walking, taking all these steps. You buy a snack, you throw it away and that sort of thing, and you go to a square where some important historical thing happened. You're starting to catch the drift, just follow the steps, you'll get a lot of different meanings. Same thing, fitness, same steps, just how fast you do it, you'll have a little nice workout. Basically, if you look at these urban games, this very simple structure of a scavenger hunt, which is basically walking from A to B with a meaning attached to it, it seems urban games are the most versatile medium. I can tell the player to just do certain steps in public space, and I can add new meaning to public space or to the actions of the citizens in public space. This is then, I mean, I'm describing it here sort of in a sloppy, funny, badly designed way. But take, for instance, what happened when Pokemon Go came out, which was a game where people started playing like crazy. And that idea, the idea of adding meaning to people walking around with a phone, was then hijacked by, this was the top right is Pokemon, no, Voter Go. Anyway, it was made around the American elections 2016. And the point was to make people go out and start catching swing states. The idea was the same. You walk around, you add a meaning to it and a specific targeted meaning to make people go vote. Bottom right is a game from Belgium. It's called City Jam. Basically, through a bunch of mini games, you are taught to take care of traffic. And the bottom left is another one. Basically, by hijacking the actions of Pokemon Go, you can deputize people and create a whole safer space. It's almost as if these games, by simply allowing people to add meanings to the several steps taking place in the real world, are magic bullets to achieve something. Well, not really, of course, because I can make all those steps. I can make them and I can add all the meanings to it there are. But people will do what they want. We thought we'd had flying cars. Instead, we have signs saying, "Go Pokemon Go and drive" in the future. And people don't care about cultural sensibilities when they just go catch Pokemon in Holocaust museums. Those are negative examples, but there are also positive examples where players use the game, the fact that you're walking outside, to get dates or to walk dogs in shelters. So basically, what I'm trying to say with this first part is that in urban games, which take place in the city, have a larger amount of tools for the player to interact with, the structured actions don't always work. For this very simple reason that players are capable idiots. They will never do what you want, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Because it's a bad thing because you think you made a perfect game with a perfectly created meaning and reason behind it, but they don't follow it. On the other hand, they can do completely new things with it. Or if there's a gap in your reasoning, they can fill it up. So they're a radical agent. An example, imagine you're sitting in a car, and especially as a passenger, and you see trees. What players do, especially in urban games, you take all the resources you have in the environment. The context, you take it, and then you appropriate it, according to Miguel Sicar's idea of play and playful, to your own needs. Take the trees, you then imagine when you're driving that a guy is jumping on it, and when there's a large gap, he has to jump and, I don't know, get a jetpack somewhere. We imagine this, but that's ultimately how we interact with the environment. And the same goes for when playing one of those urban games. And my point is that in urban games, as they are developed now, especially after Pokemon Go was introduced, since it was such a popular game, there were so many companies that said, I'm gonna make the new Pokemon Go and make people go outside and do this, do tourism, do fitness, interact with my new franchise, all that sort of stuff. My point is that within these actions, within these designs, the attention mostly goes to the game, the relation between the game design and what I call the city model, the interaction with the city. What is often excluded is player actions and their disruptions mostly. So I've created a method, more or less, based around the fit, to attune both the player actions to the game design and to the city model, so that ultimately everything works together. Will it always be a surefire option of I'm going to create steps and the player does exactly what I want? No. But I argue that when you're designing urban games, you have to particularly pay attention to the broader perspective of possibility. These are the things players might do. How do I ensure that they do the things I would like them to do? And I argue that you can do this through reverse engineering. Instead of starting from scratch, like, okay, I'm going to build all these steps, like the scavenger hunt, I'm going to do all those steps to see what the player can do. You start with a prototype, with the idea of what you think the player can do, and then you start thinking, okay, if I start playtesting this, I will see that my game will have unplanned ramifications. Players will do completely different things. And then from those completely different things, you start to work back. You start to see what in my current design affords these actions. And then the question becomes, should my current design afford these actions? And if you can't remove it completely, because that's also a thing, how can I ensure that they do the actions that I want them to do? So instead of starting from a certain game design pattern, you start with the player experiences or the player actions, work it back, and then redesign. So basically what we're trying to do is how to make sure that the outcomes of my design fit with the goal I try to achieve. And fit here is a conditional metric. So it's not that it's going to be a surefire causal relation. You're going to ensure that the possibility is there that people will do the thing you want them to do. So it's a lot less structured and a lot less demanding than rigid digital game design, which is something we can get into in the discussion, because there's a lot of these kind of player action possibilities in Watch Dogs, but it is a digital game, and there is a difference there. A small example, this is again Pokemon. If we start looking at the afforded actions of the player, you can have your core catch loop, that's basically the game, you walk around, you catch. But there's a second action you can do, which is basically walk to a Pokepoint to get resources. And another is battling. You walk to a gym to do a battle. All those things are possible actions. And these are all more or less straightforward and forwarded by the game. But then there was this. You can do more with Pokemon, and that's also what players did. People started exploring. They went to new places to see if there were new Pokemon. They went exploring so far that they fell off cliffs because they didn't pay attention. So there's also an explore possibility in that. But whether that explore possibility is actually what you want is a different matter. Another aspect which became very clear in 2016, it was a very social game. The summer of 2016 was a very happy time. Everyone was outside and that sort of stuff, compared to the winter of 2016, which was completely different. But apparently there is something in Pokemon Go which allows it to socialize. And then we have to look back into the design and see what it is. Now, once we've charted what is possible in the game, we have to start thinking what we want it to actually do. We want it to achieve a certain interaction with the city. And that may be just playing the game while walking, but we do need to understand what it needs to do in the city. But then the question is, what's the city? Is it buildings? I don't know. Is it the people? Obviously. Is it the map and the infrastructure? Can be. Is it some utopian ideal of what this, well, this is Coruscant, that's not really utopian, but is it some ideal of what the city should be? Or is it the slums? Is it not the ideal of what the city should be? Is it a blank slate? Is it a thing you can work on to improve? Is it not rural? That's also possible. Is it a space for playing, or is it a space for working? Is it data? Of course it's data. Is it so smart? Is it green? Should it be sustainable? Is it the place where most development happens? Is it desolate? Is it transport? Is it movement? Is it a top-down planning? Or is it a community thing? There are so many ideas of understanding how the city can be approached, even through a game, that when a player starts playing it, there is a very low chance that they will reach the same conclusion as you. Basically, because they can do all those things and they want to do while playing and bring in their own associations. So that's why I try to structure the goals that go into games by looking for the city models pursued in games. And a city model is basically an abstraction of how you want people to interact with the city, built out of 6 elements, which is an instigator. Someone has to want people to interact in a certain way. An ideology, that's the idea behind it, like a cleaner city, a playful city, green city, smart city. The city aspect, should the whole city follow this model, or just tiny stuff, tiny bits of small community, a street, individual actions? A carrier, I have to in one way communicate it. And citizen actions, what do I actually want the citizens to do? So if you look at the top right, that's one of the Play the City games. It's a community planning game. Basically what you do is you sit around the table, you talk about the plans and you build stuff. Through play, it goes a lot better. So the instigator there is usually the city hall. The ideology is a communal planning system for a better inclusive neighborhood. The city aspect is one neighborhood. The carrier in this case is this game, and the citizen actions are participation. There you have a much more focused idea of what you want to achieve in your game. Instead of allowing just any sort of very specific topic, you're going to interact with my scavenger hunt, and at the end you know exactly this. Now you have a larger model in which certain interpretations can occur, definitely, but you can work towards it. And different interpretations are possible, so that it's more likely that players can actually accept your idea. Now, to bring that all home, once you have the inventory of player actions and the inventory of possible city models contained in those actions, you can see which elements fit. Because not every game fits the same kind of city model. Not every game is suited for the same function. For Pokemon Go, the point is that you walk around it with your phone in daily life. That's the main action. You have to walk outside. Well, you can do it now, but you couldn't do it at home most of the time. You need the phone, but the phone is not constantly in front of your face. You need it at some points when it informs that you need it. And it has a heavy link to the franchise because every action I do is related to Pokemon. If I stand somewhere because there is a Pokemon there. So ultimately, the interactions with the city from there are more focused on, well, actually focusing on the game and playing the game on your phone, so catching them all. That's really centered on individual behavior. Exploring is in there as you have to walk around. That is a very good possibility of action. And socializing is another one, since the action is only partly linked to the phone. You're not constantly stuck to it. You have to be physically in a space, and you can do that together. There's nothing in the game which prevents you from doing that. It allows you to do stuff together. But what it doesn't do, for instance, is tourism. Because every action I do in the game is related to Pokemon. I don't go to a place and say, oh, look at how beautiful this place is. No, I go to a place because there is a Pokemon there which I want. So it affords certain things, but also disallows certain things. And instead of thinking that every game can be adapted to every other public function just because it happens in the real world, that's a fallacy. So that's basically the idea. Players are idiots, but they're capable of doing a lot of things, especially in urban games, since we have the whole world to work with. To chart that, you look at the design affordances, and from those design affordances, you figure out which city models are attached to it, and then you can determine which possibilities are contained in your game. Given that, and working this out can help you explain why all these clones from Pokemon Go did or did not work. And that's about it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sjors. A wonderful presentation. Very interesting. Together also the presentation. So I'm very much looking forward to open up the discussion. Yeah, I'm just going to collect a couple of questions from the audience, maybe 3 or so, and then we can give the presenters the chances to answer them. Are there any questions from the audience? Thomas, you have a question in the chat. Would you like to maybe? Yeah, I mean, okay, you can also do it like this. You can also ask them in verbally.
For sure. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. So I was really curious about sort of what you didn't talk about, or you promised to talk about. So this relationship with smart cities, smart city discourse, and how you see games like Watch Dogs, Legion, or other games as potential vehicles for critique. And so what kinds of critique are enabled by them? And you talked a little bit about this already, of course, in your presentation, but maybe you can talk about it in a bit more explicitly, and then in a little bit more general terms, and then the other way around. So what kinds of critique does it not facilitate?
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks so much. Maybe Toni, you can answer that, or we can have a look if there are additional questions. I don't see them directly, so yeah, sure.
I can just go ahead, yeah. Well, I think, yeah, what kinds of critique? I mean, what are the different kinds of critique? I'm just gonna say 2 things maybe. On the one hand, I think there is a discursive critique in the sense that it is a representation of certain tendencies in the smart city and how it relates to practices of control. So that's, yeah, on the representational level, I would say. But then what I wanted to sort of draw attention to is sort of that in a way engaging with the smart city is also engaging with algorithms, right? And so what in a way any video game is an algorithmic something, and you engage with rule systems in a way. And so what I found so interesting in this game is, for instance, that usually games in cities will try to actually hide the algorithmic character. So there's a lot of research also about how you try to create overlapping algorithmic systems to make the feeling that you're dealing with something programmed, with a simulation, disappear, to make that impression disappear. But here it's actually foregrounded, all this algorithmic aspects of the game architecture, so that you start to also get a sense for how it actually operates. And so when I say that you know, games are oftentimes training mechanisms or learning tools. We teach stuff through games. And so in this game or games like this, you actually learn how, algorithms perceive by testing out how sensitive certain guards are. And so that's how actually there's a practical critique or maybe a pedagogy of how to engage with smart cities and sort of the perceptual side of this smart city. And what kind of critique does it not facilitate? Yeah, I mean, in a way, what I just described is in a way you attune yourself to the paradigm of the smart city. You don't even assume that you can step out of it and critique it from an outside point of view, which I think is what a lot of smart city discourse is also about, that question. Do we even go there? Do we want to politically, socially step into that sphere of the smart city, which is by many like Adam Greenfield or Orit Halpern and her co-authors interpreted as a zone of control? I mean, we probably have to step into it, and that kind of evacuates the possibility of a more fundamental critique, which I guess, we don't get in this game, also because it is by definition an algorithmic environment already to begin with. Okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to also maybe to follow up on that, but I see Vanessa's hand also raised.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, like, question verbally or in chat, but now I'm asking it. It's also for Toni. And I don't know if I understood correctly what's the goal of the game, like what we actually try to achieve. But I was wondering, because I think there's an enemy and we're trying to discover the enemy and finding out who is the actual terrorist, if I understood you correctly. So that's why I'm wondering if it seems that we as a player, we engage with the city in different ways. So in a way, there are aspects, we use the infrastructure you said, we create pockets of invisibility and navigate invisible through it, but we also probably need to discover something, hence, so the enemy. We have to discover, we will probably also, said we hack, so we also use the infrastructure for discovery. And I was wondering if these two sides, because I mean, in a way that's paradox. So we use the same thing to be invisible and to make someone else visible. And in theory, our enemies could do the same thing. They could also hack and make us visible and become invisible by using the infrastructure of the smart city. So and also you said we also recruit people and there's also these elements. So I was wondering, is there a difference how the game treats us as player and our possibilities and our engagement with the technology and the enemies? Like, because, so what we can do and on how we can tweak the software or the algorithm, and maybe why don't our enemies do the same? So maybe there's a political comment in this difference. I don't know.
I mean, I would say that maybe that's where the game falters a little bit, because Sjors said that players are capable idiots, but artificial intelligence in games is even more idiotic and actually quite quite rule-based. And so in a way, the player sort of is the excess over what the algorithm can grasp, always. Even if the game wants to suggest otherwise, even if the game wants to create a certain kind of artificial intelligence that is similar to a human, artificial intelligence in games definitely is not capable of doing that. And so there is a real asymmetry that actually underestimates also a smart city smart city operations in real life, because they probably are, they are also supervised and overseen by humans, and thus can also be disrupted or reoriented in ways that actually doesn't happen in the game, because in the end it is a rule-based system.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was just also wondering if like we're talking about a little bit of a variety of different kind of urban games. Sjors mostly talking about Pokemon Go, and Toni especially focusing on Watch Dogs Legions. I was just wondering if we see certain elements that Sjors was talking about, basically the agency of the gamer and the room also to kind of break with some of the expectancies that maybe developers has. Did you experience something similar, Toni, and maybe also vice versa? Do you see the things that stood out for you in these in playing and seeing and analyzing these games? Do you see relationships between the arguments you make based on Watch Dogs Legions? Well, not so much on the stealth aspect, of course, but more in terms of the algorithmic and the smart city teams.
In relation to Sjors' presentation,
yes,
I mean,
yes.
For instance, I find it quite interesting how Sjors started with the scavenger hunt, which is also a very simple algorithm, you could say. So it's also it has that gamic structure. And again, the what seems to be your preoccupation, Sjors, I find that quite interesting, is to make sure that people don't do things that you don't expect. So, right. And in a way, in Watch Dogs Legion, you have to do the thing that the algorithm or the smart city doesn't expect, that goes beyond what it is prepared for, and that's how you disrupt it. Yeah, I was wondering, listening to you, Sjors, how that works with these. Trying to narrow down to a specific goal. I wonder whether that isn't also has that worked? So in the sense, you said that Pokemon Go, for instance, works for walking outside, but not for tourism. But I was wondering whether those goals could not also overlap, and if there couldn't come actually interesting synergies or excess effects of these benefits from certain overlaps, actually. So that the unexpected thing that people might do might be a good thing instead of the thing that has to be suppressed, let's say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, trying to chart what the players can more or less do, it's not because, I mean, I call them idiots, but they're also useful things they do. And indeed, the addition of tourism, as of yet, well, a bit more now, but when I studied it, it wasn't as much in the game yet. It needed several steps extra from the player to be implemented, which is definitely possible. But then if I design my game with a certain goal in mind, then it needs extra steps to be achieved. So if my goal from the beginning was, well, it's also possible for tourism, which some, for instance, bars jumped upon, like, now I can get people to my places. It needed extra steps, which made it a less likely scenario to be achieved. Because that's also a bit what you've seen when restaurants started buying lures, so that people came to their restaurant to catch Pokemon. But once you're in the restaurant, you can also buy stuff. But it turned out the players were really attuned to how far they could be from the restaurant, so they didn't actually go in. So to implement a new function to it, it would need several extra steps, and that complicated doesn't necessarily complicate it, but in your design, it doesn't really afford that goal. So if you want that goal, you need to redesign it a bit. That's why in the prototype phase, or when you're redesigning a thing, you can change it a bit. And that's also something I found that interesting in your talk, where you basically called several of the gameplay elements rule-based puzzles. And that is exactly the sort of difference I'm going for, because in the rule-based puzzles, you have a closed-off possibility of actions. And you can do that in a rather okay way. You can do that in quite some individual configurations. But for instance, just sitting around and enjoying the scenery will ultimately disrupt my gaming experience, because the guards will catch me and that sort of thing. So there are more limits placed in that form. Yet by putting those limits on it, especially in a digital form, you can draw attention to certain points, like you've indicated. Actually highlighting the algorithm, for instance, now becomes a thing. In an urban game in physical space, where I still want people to question the algorithm, there's a lot more distraction in that case. Take a scavenger hunt where I have a stable structure of where you have to go, and my goal is so that finally at the end people start figuring out, hey, I'm doing the same thing constantly. Can be that that's achieved, that people actually come to that realization. But since there's in a physical world so much more distraction, which in a digital world you can guide so much, you could draw much more attention to specific aspects of the smart city in this case. Because what you have seen in most smart cities games, like really dealing with smart cities, they are sometimes too much top down. If you look at the IBM City 1 thing, it's just a puzzle game where the option is always choose the best IBM product. That's how you make a smart city. And that doesn't work. People start saying like, yeah, but if I choose another option, which isn't there, but if I had another option where this would be possible, I could make an even better one. So that there's a tension there in being able to steer the player towards a certain aspect you want to draw attention to, and being too demanding of this is how you have to think. And digital and physical have different possibilities in that.
I guess that's also one of the reasons why nobody really managed to successfully design or produce any kind of game that came close to the popularity of Pokemon Go as today, right? That's also what you were trying to point out, or do you feel that?
Definitely. I mean, one thing from the Pokemon Go thing is, of course, it had Pokemon behind it. There was a $1 billion industry throwing it into everyone's face. But the clones afterwards, for instance, the Jurassic Park one or the Ghostbuster one appeared and was gone after 2 months. It didn't work because, first of all, it wasn't new anymore. And why would I want to collect ghosts in a city? There was nothing which fit particularly with that kind of looking and hunting for something. There's now, they're working on a Witcher one where you have to hunt monsters. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess, but why would I want to hunt monsters that want to kill me inside my city for longer than a short period? Same goes for the dinosaur one. Why are there dinosaurs in my world? It's nice, but even in the Jurassic Park universe, this takes a certain film before dinosaurs are in my city. It doesn't always fit with how I just normally interact with my city. So some of them just, and also their mechanics sometimes changed it around a bit, which made the focus more on battling, or in the Walking Dead one, there's a building part to it as well.
I see a question come from Carolyn. Please also feel free to raise your hand if there are any others. But Carolyn, yeah.
Sure. I'm also too slow to type, so I'll say my question. I just want to follow up on what you've been saying, Sjors. Thanks for this reflection also on the specificity of Pokemon Go. And I just wondered, given your kind of insights into also, I guess, the reactions of the industry also to the, with the copycat games or spin-offs you've described. I just wondered, how has the industry reacted to the current COVID restrictions for games of this nature? And if you could just elaborate a little bit on, like, the ongoing pandemic restrictions and sheltering at home, and what that means perhaps either for games of this kind or in terms of industry reactions to reduce mobility.
I know that not every game has adapted. For instance, the biggest difference is the Pokemon Go at some point, which also took some time, adapted to the fact that people didn't go out. They made, for instance, actions on a distance possible. They made the distance raid possible, so you don't have to go somewhere. You had to, of course, have one of the raid passes, which you could, guess what, buy, but sometimes also earn. So they found a new monetizable strategy, but at least you could do stuff from your home. And they also expanded your circle in which things would appear and you could access it. That's how Pokemon more or less dealt with it. Like they jumped in on it and did certain actions to at least ensure that people could keep on playing while staying at home. But for instance, the Harry Potter one, which is the same developer, the Wizards Unite, I believe it's called, that didn't do it. There, the circle is still small. And it also has less players. That's of course a thing. And the Jurassic Park, I don't think either changed anything. Pokemon has been more or less guiding in this, since they have been steadily updating it for different playstyles now. They didn't do it in the beginning. In the beginning, they mostly just added updates which made you finish the game quicker. But more or less after a year, they figured out, we can do other things to, first of all, make more money, but also to create different kinds of interaction with the game. There was the raids, which allowed for more people to join up. They added on the social aspect. But now they more or less allowed that to happen from a distance. Although now they've sort of accepted that the pandemic is more or less over, because the wider space is still there. The wider range of accessing is still working. but there's more assignments focusing on walking again. It's seen as being over again a bit more. There's still some leniency, but they adapted for a while.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a little bit more time for maybe one or two more questions, depending on how long the answers will be, and of course the questions. Anyone? Thomas, see your hand, and I see also Federico. Maybe Federico first, and then Thomas. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I hope you don't regret that decision of giving me the time. I'm going to express some thoughts that have been, in my head since this talk, so they might come out a little bit confusing. But it's mostly connected to Toni's talk, which I thought both talks were great, so thank you for them. But I was thinking of this spectrum of visibility and invisibility, especially now in smart cities and now that we're leaving trails of data all over the place. And the idea of stealth as hiding ourselves from or this surveillance mechanisms maybe and persuasion mechanisms, whatnot of. But the other side of that algorithm would be censorship, I guess, right? When you want to be visible but are not allowed to be. And I was just thinking in my head, I wanted to hear you had something to say about that relationship, maybe how stealth and censorship as these two forms of invisibility sort of would relate, and if maybe also stealth would be a way also to circumvent censorship somehow. I guess I still have fake thoughts, but maybe you, Toni, have more insights into this because you've worked on this.
Yeah, let me see. And I have 1 minute. Okay, really quickly, I would say, yeah, I think that in a way, censorship sort of is about is when you are not allowed to express yourself when you want to say something, and stealth in a way speaks to a quite different desire within a cultural desire. At least that's how I analyze it, which is precisely about this idea that people do not want to be perceived. So it's not necessarily about public speech, let's say. It's really about perception. So me, this is an aesthetic project, and the fact that more and more people actually would like to not be perceived by ubiquitous computing and the Internet of Things and so forth. And so in that sense, I usually don't connect it to things like censorship, and I would see it as maybe as you described it, also the opposite, the inversion of it. If censorship is about wanting to speak and not being able to, then stealth is about not wanting to be perceived, which is by technology, which is sort of becoming more and more normalized, something like that. Yeah, that's what comes to mind off the top of my head.
All right, it's 5 o'clock exactly. I would like to thank speakers very much. Very interesting discussion also of work in progress and work finished. So thank you so much. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.